Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing Dodge Viper Ownership Part 2, the voiceover edition. Also known as I had a minor neck procedure recently and I cannot really leave a chair, so we're just going to reuse some old footage. But with that, let's get started. Let's start with some basics here. The driver's pedals are offset to the left, partially to accommodate for the transmission tunnel, but I also think it was an ergonomic decision because now when you hit the clutch, instead of your knee banging into the back of the steering wheel, it goes next to the steering wheel, so I think that was a deliberately planned layout. Now it's not by a lot, it still feels comfortable, but they are not centered. Next is that these seats are not really adjustable. They don't slide forward or backwards. However, there is a switch, just like the window switches, to bring the pedals closer and further away. That is pretty much their only form of adjustment in this car. Other ergonomic things is that I thought the shifter was way too high up when I first got this car. It is at the perfect height so that you don't really have to take your hand that far off of the steering wheel every time you go to shift. The AC outlet pushes to pop up and then pushes back to close. I think that's actually pretty cool. There's also a cutout for your arm in the door card so that you're not slamming your elbow every time that you go to move your arm on that side or every time that you steer the wheel. So it's a small little cramped vehicle, but they laid everything out so that you have space in the right spots and that you're not uncomfortable all the time. However, one complaint I do have about the shifter, other than the level of force it takes, is that reverse is ambiguous. Especially when I was first learning the car, my success rate of actually hitting reverse instead of fifth gear was probably something like 50%. And this car does have enough power that it will not stall out if you are starting to release the clutch in fifth gear. You can actually get the car rolling forward from a standstill in fifth. I don't think the clutch likes it, to be clear, but it does work. Next is the sun visors on this car. They are tiny and they are practically useless, but also the roof bar is so low that if you put them down, it pretty much covers half of your windshield. The next thing is the e-brake placement. I thought it was a little bit weird, but like I said, it's a tight car. There's not a lot of space to put it. It is on the far side of the center console on the passenger side of the vehicle, so you got to reach way over to grab it. In fact, it is so far over that when I was first driving it, partially just because I was so excited and nervous to drive my dream car, but also because it was just out of my sight because it's so far out of the way, I forgot to take the e-brake off the first time I went to take off in this car. I figured it out pretty quickly because the car didn't move, but that was an embarrassing moment for me. Just know that it is not necessarily in your line of sight, so you're not always thinking about it because it's so far over. But speaking of the center console, it hinges on the side and it opens up so the driver can have access to it, but not really the passenger. I'm sure that there was some reason they did this, but I cannot tell you what it is. I think it's a little bit bizarre that only one person gets access to the stuff in the middle. Another oddity in this car is there is a push button start, but not a push button stop. So you have to turn the key to the on position, then press the big red button to start the car, but to turn off the car, you have to turn the key back. However, that does not let you just pull the key out. You turn it back to turn off the engine, then there is a release button that you have to press that lets you take it out the rest of the way. Otherwise, the keys are going to be stuck in the ignition. Moving on now to the front of the car, the hood release is in the front bumper. It is between these front splits on the front bumper. If you open it with the car locked, it will set off the alarm, so you don't just go around opening Viper hoods, please. But that did make me a little bit nervous when I first found that out. Also, this is a 2004 model. You can see it has the HID headlights. This was really new technology at that time, so I was not expecting these to be any good considering I've had many other vehicles that came from around this era. However, this was also almost a $100,000 car when it came out, so they did put the best technology that was available in a lot of places, and the headlights are one of them. The cutoff was super clean. The headlights actually work extremely well at night, even compared to some modern cars that I've driven or that I've owned. They are fantastically bright, and because the car is so low, you don't have to worry about these blinding other people, and you can pretty much point them straight ahead so it throws the light further because it's not going to be pointed high enough to blind other drivers. For that reason, nighttime visibility is actually a lot better than what I was expecting, and that was a really good surprise. But they couldn't put all the luxury things everywhere, so the top is only put up and down manually. You have to physically lift it up and push it down, and there is like one latch on the driver's side that keeps it in the down position. Kind of sketched me out at first, but it's down in there well enough that it's pretty secured. Also, it makes it a lot easier to put back up because you're not constantly running around to both sides to try to release both sides, and there's probably some weight savings associated with that, but let's be real, this is a ridiculously powerful car and it's only like 3,400 pounds. I'm not sure how much weight a motorized top would have really added, but I'm sure it probably wouldn't have been a ton. But from a reliability standpoint, it is one less thing to break, so pick your battle. Do you want the simplicity or do you want the luxury? and at this point in this age and with what I can afford, I like the simplicity personally. Another thing that could be a pro or a con depending on who you are is that high speeds in this car are scary easy. Like, you lose track of how fast you're going. I've talked about this in a prior video that I've linked below, but the gearing in this car is extremely tall. So first gear goes to like over 60 miles an hour. Second gear tops out at somewhere around 85. So if you're cruising at 90 miles per hour on the freeway and you're in 6th gear, you're only spinning the engine at somewhere around 2000 RPM, maybe a little bit lower. The engine is just so powerful that even with that really low RPM at really high speeds, it doesn't bog, it doesn't hold back, and it's comfortable cruising, and you can accelerate in gear with no issue, which means you'll probably be driving way faster than you thought you were. Just something to be aware of. Try not to get arrested. But that's not always easy to do because, as I've said in other videos, you get very, very, very stereotyped as the owner and driver of one of these cars. On one hand, even if you're following people at a reasonable distance going a reasonable speed, they get out of your way a lot more quickly in this car than they have in any other vehicle I've driven. And I'm still following at, 3 to 5 car lengths. I'm still going at the same speed they are, but they just see this thing coming up and they move over, which is kind of cool. But even when you're driving reasonably, people assume that you are speeding. If you're going 10 to 15 miles per hour over the speed limit, which in the grand scheme of things is really not that fast, but it's especially not that fast for a vehicle like this, I've had people honk at me and shake their fists and yell some pretty flagrant obscenities about how I need to slow down when I'm driving 35 miles per hour in a 30 mile per hour zone in a car that tops out at 193. That's right, at 160 miles per hour less than my top speed, people are telling me I am going too fast. It is what it is. People suck. You just learn to deal with it. As part of that, people also assume you're tailgating even though you're not, and I assume that it's partially because the car is so small and it's so low that people just see that you're really low in their mirror and they assume that you had to be extremely close to be that low. That's just the height of the car though. But even when you're 50 to 100 feet back, people still feel the need to brake tap you. That's not even when you're flying up on them. Beyond that, when you have passengers inside of the car, especially if they're not used to a car that is this low, or they're not used to a car in general, and they're more of like a pickup SUV type person, the sensation of speed is very different when you're really low to the ground. And because you have this really long hood that you're looking over, you don't really have as great of a sensation for where the nose of the car is. So your passengers will also think that you're tailgating and that you're traveling at Mach Jesus, even though you're going 70 miles per hour and you are 50 feet behind the car in front of you. Which in the Viper, because it's such a small car, means you're 3 to 3.5 car lengths behind them, and you have more powerful brakes than almost anything on the road with tires that can back them up. What all these things really boil down to is that regardless of what you do and how you drive this car, people are still going to stereotype you and make assumptions about who you are and what you are doing, so you might as well just drive it how you want to, because they're going to treat you the same either way. And you can in fact drive this thing around town or on the highway calmly with very little effort, and it's a comfortable cruiser because it is a very well dialed suspension, and like I said, it has no issue operating at low RPM. The suspension is actually a lot softer and more forgiving than you might think. The seats are pretty comfortable, and you could reasonably use this as a commuting car, not in the sense that it gets great fuel economy or that it's practical, but in the sense that it will not absolutely shatter your spine. This car is a 2004. I have a 2003 Subaru Forester, which is a pretty typical wagon slash small SUV from the same era. I never thought I would be saying these words, but even though the Dodge Viper is a tuned performance machine versus the Subaru Forester being, the epitome of everything a car guy hates, the Viper is still a softer and more comfortable ride, partially because I think the seat materials and stuff are a little bit better. I think it's a little bit more supportive, so it's not really hurting your back as much, but I also think that the suspension is just a lot more well-tuned, and they put a lot more money and development into it to make sure that it wasn't completely lacking compromises and that you would still somewhat want to buy this, because again, this was almost $100,000 when it came out. And finally is a problem with not necessarily the car itself, but with their ownership history. I've linked a video below where I talked about how I think my car, even though it has a clean accident history, was probably crashed by the previous owner and the damage was secretly repaired. Apparently that is quite common for vehicles like this because they are so easy to total out. But beyond that, I never realized that cars like this have extremely high ownership counts. The average owner only keeps the car for 18 to 24 months. Now in my case, I found a 2-owner car. I am the 3rd owner. The first guy had it for 7 years. The second guy had it for about 12 and a half years. That is extremely rare. That is part of the reason I purchased this vehicle, is typically they change hands often. That said, if you're shopping for one of these, don't necessarily be deterred if it does have 6, 7, or 8 owners, because not only do the types of people who have these want to get something newer and better every couple years, or trade toys, or try something different, you also get people who specialize in the market for these vehicles and who only do this to flip the vehicles for a profit. So a lot of times you'll see people who only own the car for anywhere from 1 to 5 months, and they are just flipping the vehicle. But that said, one of the first ones I looked at, it had something like 8 or 9 owners, and I was freaking out briefly. And then I saw the previous owner had it for something like 6 or 7 years, and I was like, okay, it's not that the car had a lot of hidden problems. It's just that there was a lot of people early on who wanted to try the new cool Viper and then who were flipping it for a profit. So if you're looking at one of these, that could be something that comes up, but try to focus on the length of ownership and make sure that it's not like the last 4 owners all had the car for 1 month. Something like that would be a definite red flag, and I would steer clear in that case. But those are a few more things I've learned since owning a Viper. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.